Welcome to the 12th Annual Writers' Symposium by the Sea at Point Loma, Nazarene University. I'm Dean Nelson on the journalism faculty at the university, and with us today is Eugene Peterson, an author of 30-some books, a pastor, a professor of spiritual theology, probably best known for his translation of the Bible into plain English, called the Message Bible. He rarely makes public appearances, and so this is a real treat for us. Reverend Peterson, welcome, and thank you for being part of our symposium this year. I want to talk about storytelling with you. You have said that stories invite us into a world other than ourselves. And I'd like to hear you explain what that means.
Maybe a world larger than ourselves. We're a storytelling people. And our lives are stories. They have plot, they have intent, they have other people. We're never the only person in the story. And the Bible is our greatest story. And if we just live within ourselves, or our lives are just determined by our own needs, our wants, our desires, it gets a very small world. And it's really not a storied world. It's not a world that has much action in it except our own desires. So storytellers have always been the people in our society who, in the cultures, that have brought us into a world that's larger than us. It usually includes gods or God, and it includes generations. There's a past, there's a future. We've always told stories. And the Christian story is not unlike those stories in the way story works, but it is the story for Christians that puts God at the center of the story, not as in some Greek, Akkadian, Assyrian stories. The gods were kind of in the background. They were doing things, but they never got involved with the people. And here we have a story that where God enters our lives, and well, that's it. We tell stories.
Well, and so much of your writing involves and quotes from and has been informed by fiction writers. You quote from Wendell Berry. He seems to be one of your favorites. Flannery O'Connor, I've read references to in your writings. Walker Percy, Wallace Stegner, Dostoevsky, Ann Tyler. Some detective novels have gotten themselves worked into your writings. And so I'd like you to explore that and tell me why, and then really tell me what was the impact of James Joyce's Ulysses on you. You say it's profound. I'd love to hear it explained.
Well, let me start with James Joyce. I was a new pastor. I was trying to understand my congregation. They didn't seem to me very interesting, to tell you the truth. I'd always thought when I became a pastor I'd have all the stars in town come. Interesting people, celebrities. They stayed away in droves. And
you had tens of worshipers.
That's right. And as I was muddling through all of this and kind of feeling sorry for myself, wishing I had the kind of a congregation that some of my friends always bragged that they had, I later found out they lied a lot. I was reading Ulysses, James Joyce's greatest work. And it's about one man, Leopold Bloom, and he doesn't do anything really interesting. It's just an ordinary day in this Dubliner's life. And I began to see through Joyce's storytelling how interesting this ordinary life is. And I can still remember the page. I think I dog-eared the page. It was 338. I realized this is my congregation. Leopold Bloom sits in my pew every Sunday. And it was a conversion. It was an imagination conversion. To expand from that, storytellers tell us about ways of living that we have not yet appropriated ourselves or thought of ourselves. They expand the horizons of our lives, or they open up depths in our lives that we didn't know we had. I find fiction writers, some of the best spiritual writers, whether they're Christians or not, religious or not, they're probing the ordinary world of our lives. And they're great. I think pastors should read fiction a lot more than they do.
In fact, you've said that seminary, the first 2 years of seminary, should just be literature training.
That's right. Yeah. Learn how to read a story. I probably shouldn't say this, but my wife is not here.
It's just us.
Okay. My wife and I we've done this for years, spend an hour before supper each evening reading aloud to each other. She usually does the reading. I listen. We're reading right now a book I'd read 30 years ago, Tale of Two Cities, Dickens' book on the French Revolution. And Dickens is a really fine writer. He's one of the canonical fiction writers for me. And but Jan has never read this before, and it's old-fashioned. It's Victorian, so he doesn't. You kind of enter into that leisurely, slow storytelling world of the Victorians, and every once in a while, Jan says, "Now, why did he say that? What's going to happen now? I don't understand what's going on." And I said, "Jan, you've got to let the storyteller tell you. Wait for the storyteller. Don't get in a hurry." It's great counsel for pastors. Impatience is the besetting sin of pastors. We're in a hurry. We want to see things happen. And sometimes it takes 300 pages before something happens. Or the thing you want to have happen.
I'd like you also to explain this line, because it goes right along with what you're saying. You have said that every time a story is well told, the gospel has been served. What does that mean?
It means that you realize that I am a story. And the substructure of the gospel is that we're involved in a life that means something, that ordinary people, there are no heroes in the Bible. You realize that? There really aren't. I mean, the ones that we call heroes are usually villains or big sinners, and we don't want to be them anyway, so. But we find ourselves plotted. We find ourselves as a character, as meaning. No sentence in a story well told, no sentence, no person is optional. Good storytellers make every sentence count. There are no throwaway lines. And if I get a feel for that, I'm not sure this very often is very conscious, but I get the feeling that there are no throwaway lines in my life. Everything I do is part of what's going on and the story, and in some way it's going to mean something. I might not find it out for 10 years, but I'm going to find it out.
Well, and this would then support why you like Wendell Berry so much, right? Because of that rhythm of
right.
Everything matters.
Everything matters.
What else about Wendell Berry? I know you quote him a lot.
Well, Wendell Berry, maybe, I don't know, he's a complex writer. He writes so well. But maybe the thing as a pastor that I like so much about him is he makes community is no longer a word, it's a story. But we're not stories by ourselves. And one of the things in the church that is the hardest for pastors, well, for anybody to deal with, is the fragmentation, the individualism that separates us all. We think we go to church, but then we go off and we do it ourselves. We're trying to find something that we can use for ourselves. And we've lost the pronoun we. We really have. And Wendell Berry stores we and us to our language. And the little fictional community he writes about in his novels is, he keeps writing about he's been writing about these same people for 40 years, 50 years, I don't know. Yeah, 50 years, I think. And he keeps coming up with a new slant on these people. We know that those of us who have been reading him, we've been reading these stories forever, and then all of a sudden here's another story of somebody that we thought we knew all about, and we're finding the new things. I don't know how many books he's going to write.
And they're always attached to the land.
The land.
On which they live.
And the families, the neighbors. Now, there are no Lone Rangers in his books.
How big of an ego kick was it to get quoted by Bono?
I hope Bono never hears this, but
he's a viewer. He's one of our fans. Just be careful.
When I was quoted by Bono, I was told this by a student of mine in Vancouver. He brought me this magazine. I don't know what it was. Look, Dr. Peterson, Bono quotes you. And I said, tell me, who's Bono? And this poor student, he was an Asian student, and he was just crestfallen. I mean, I went down in his estimation just so fast. After I found out who Bono was, and then people started bringing me his music, and I listened to his music, and I thought, I like this guy. And I was starting to, after a while, I was feeling quite pleased that he knew me.
Yes, but the rest of the story is when he invited you to come and hang with them for a while, you turned him down.
Well, his chaplain did. He has a chaplain who travels with him. They were in Chicago, and he invited me to come and spend a couple of days with them, just to hang out. But I was pushing a deadline on the message. I was finishing up the Old Testament at the time, and I really couldn't do it.
You may be the only person alive who would turn down the opportunity just to make a deadline. I mean, come on. It's Bono, for crying out loud.
Dean, it was Isaiah.
Yeah. That was awesome. Okay. Well, let's talk about your translating the Bible into modern language. Somebody once said that all translation is betrayal. How do you think about what you did with translating the Bible into modern English with a statement like that?
I think it's pretty snobbish. It's an old phrase, you know. Translator, traitor. Sounds better in Latin. But where would we be without translators? Now, the fact is that every language is different. So you cannot literally translate from one language to another. When you do, you just end up with misinformation, misunderstanding. So the worst translations are those translations that are trying to be literal.
Wasn't it Luther who said literalists were lemmings?
That's right.
Of course, you're not Lutheran. Well, keep going though, because that whole literal thing, that's a big deal in some cultures.
Well, it is, and it's unfortunate, but I think it's probably People want to be true to the Bible. They want to keep this. This is a sacred text. They don't want anybody tampering with it. So they think that if they can just get it, literal, then nothing else can creep in. But each language has its own colloquialisms, vernacular, rhythms, syntax. I like what Kwame Bediako, an African theologian, scholar, says. And he's talking about Africa, where they have a lot of different languages. He said, every time the Bible is translated, it gets fresh meaning. Because every language has its own unique quality. And so every time it's translated, another language gets to put in its 2 cents worth in the ramifications of this text. Like a stone, a gemstone, that you turn it a little bit and new light comes off of it. The stone doesn't change, but the light, the hue, the vibrations, they change a little bit. So every time the Bible is translated, it expands. It is not diluted. It's larger, and I think that's true.
What's too far, though? I've seen the Leadership Bible, the Skateboarders Bible, the Living Bible. Mine died. I didn't know what to feed it. But what do you do with trying to put it so much into a colloquial culture? Is there a distortion problem there?
There can be. There's always a temptation to try to be relevant or cute, eye-catching. I had an editor. I had editors on a different editor for every book of the Bible. Their job was to make sure I was staying true to the text and not distorting it. What I was trying to do, Dean, was from the very outset, I was thinking if Isaiah was saying this in America, how would he say it? I didn't want to do much interpretation. I didn't want to do explanation. That would be going the route of paraphrase. But I wanted to say it in such a way. I thought, nobody in Isaiah's time had to go to a dictionary or a handbook to find out what he was talking about. I wanted to translate in such a way that the images he used were images that would be recognizable to somebody in my congregation or the man on the street. And it's not easy. It's very hard, and you're always kind of walking on the edge of a precipice, too much, too little. But I had my friends, I had my editors, my scholars who checked what I was doing, and I wanted to use the word lucky in the Beatitudes. Blessed sound a little too religious. And it's in Hebrew and Greek, the word they used, it was not a religious word. It was happy. Many translations now say happy. I liked lucky. You know why I liked lucky?
Why?
Because there was a woman in my congregation who had never come to church. She was 40 years old. She was kind of an ex-hippie. Still, she wasn't ex, really.
I was going to say, can you be an ex-hippie?
No, she wasn't. She wove all her own fabrics and wore clunky shoes, and she was beautiful in a kind of a folksy way. And she came, her husband was an alcoholic, her son was a drug addict, and she came to church because she had friends she'd met in Al-Anon, but she always slipped out. She never came and visited and shook my hand at the door. I never knew who she was. Nobody told me who she was. And then one week, I was starting a series of sermons on David. And she came through the door and she shook my hand and she said, "Pastor, thank you. I'd never heard that story before." And the next week, every week, "I never heard that story before. I feel so lucky." And then she kept using the word lucky. "I feel so lucky." Well, suddenly the word lucky had a biblical sound to it. Surprise. Never knew this could happen. So I tried to put it in the Bible. And my editor said, "Eugene, you can't do that. There's a whole subculture out there that thinks lucky is a nickname for Lucifer. And they'll just trash the whole thing just because of lucky." So I had to give up.
What'd you use?
You kept blessed. I said, you are blessed when.
Oh, okay. I guess I should have known that had I read your book. Well, on the whole thing about translation, though, isn't reading itself a type of translation?
It is. Reading is one of the hardest things we do. Most difficult things we do to do it accurately. I just wrote a book about reading, and I was amazed at how difficult it is.
This is the book, Eat This Book, right?
That's correct.
Marvelous. Actually, I have read that one.
You're lucky.
You want to do this symposium for me next year? I want to ask you about something and see if you meant this as hyperbole. You wrote one time that most of what we've learned about God is wrong. Do you still feel that way? And what does it mean?
It means that most of what we learn about life is wrong, and God most of all. As we grow up, we think the earth is flat, and we're wrong about that. We gradually we think our parents are just jerks, and we start to find that they're pretty much okay. We're ill-formed when we're born, and we gradually, by increments, we start to get the hang of things. We go to school, we have experiences, and God is one of the realities in which we deal with that gets encrusted with a lot of stuff. What neighborhood kids are saying, we hear on the media, and so we have to work our way through a lot of misunderstanding. But see, the basic thing is just we're sinners. We don't have a sanctified imagination to receive things pure. And so we're constantly having to be corrected, being rebuked, come to some new understanding, learning. And this is why Jesus Christ is so central to what we're doing, because we have now a revelation in the way we can understand, in our terms, not fancy, not elitist, just everyday-ish. But yeah, and one of the reasons that complicates this is we really don't want God. We want to be our own gods. And so when we get a picture of God that doesn't take account of how I want him to be, we reject it, or we modify it, try to turn it into something that is useful to us. So pastors are we're at the forefront of all this. Because one of our jobs is to keep the perceptions clean of God. And people are coming to us all the time, why doesn't God do this? Why did God let this happen? Why does God, I hate God. Well, tell me about the God you hate. I probably hate him too. So that's why we gather these people every week in church, to incrementally build a true picture, a whole picture of God.
Tell me why you'd rather have your books in a bookstore section that's not in the inspiration section, but you'd rather have your books over in the cookbooks section. Tell me why you said that.
Did I say that?
Yeah, you did. Trust me, I'm a journalist. I don't know why that's so funny.
I guess I feel that there's so much religious or inspirational so-called writing that is so thin soup, soupy. I'd rather be associated with serious writers who have lived what they've written, who've spent their lives trying to get this straight. Writing is hard work, and religious writing is often really badly written. And so you don't get to choose those things. I don't know, the cookbook thing is, people buy cookbooks because they want to cook. People don't always buy religious books because they want to be good or serve God. It becomes a substitute. In fact, some people buy cookbooks that way. I have a friend who buys cookbooks all the time, and she never cooks a meal. Buying the cookbook, looking at the pictures, that satisfies. And
do you have any advice for the writers in our audience or our viewers who might be watching this? People who think, I think I'd like to write. I'd like to be a storyteller. What do you want to tell them?
Do it. We need all we can get. There are never enough storytellers. There are a lot of people who want to write stories, but they don't want to go through the discipline, the agony, the immersion in life that requires to tell the truth with all of this. No, I think writing is one of the sacred callings. I wish, in fact, that the church would ordain writers the way they ordain pastors and professors. Give some dignity to this work of the imagination that William Blake always capitalized the word imagination. For him, it was the Holy Spirit. And I don't know if he ever explained that or not, but the imagination in our culture right now, the imagination is maybe the least developed faculty in adults. We let other people do our imagining for us. And we usually, and as a culture, we take the lowest denominator of imagination. But the imagination is almost, not quite, the same thing as faith. It's that which connects what we see and what we don't see, and pulls us through what we see into what we don't see. Now, when that imagination then involves trust and participation in the unseen, it's faith. But imagination is the training ground for that. So that's why I think novelists, poets, we ought to ordain them. I mean, they're very important to the life of the faith, the life of the church.
Eugene Peterson, thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome.
That was wonderful. That was wonderful.